It's about air tightness. Plug the holes, keep the bugs and the dust outside, and you will save energy and make a healthy home. I'm sorry if that's a negative outcome to you, but we need to keep the dust and the bugs outside, and codes are going to require us to save energy. And yes, you will create a healthy and comfortable indoor environment that manages moisture.
Hello and welcome to the Building Sciology Potty, where we talk about better buildings to live and breathe in. My name is Jess Kismet and I am your host. Well, what can I say? The rock stars just keep on coming. Joining us today is Dr. John Straube, one of the world's leading experts in building science, moisture physics and high-performance enclosure design. Dr. Straube is an associate professor at the University of Waterloo in both the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, as well as the School of Architecture. He is also a principal and senior building science specialist at RDH Building Science. He's written a bunch of excellent books, which will be linked in the show notes. And with his decades of testing, modelling and diagnosing complex building enclosure failures, have shaped modern construction practices across North America and beyond. Welcome, Dr. Straube.
Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
It's really a pleasure and an honour to have you on the show. Really appreciate it. So, you are in Canada at the moment. That's where you live, right? Which part of Canada?
I am near Toronto, where the World Cup games have stopped because we're moving at a higher level now. But that's sort of the most populous city in Canada, in the most populous province of Canada. And it's probably, from your listeners' point of view, what matters is that we actually get reasonably cold in the winter, like I would say minus 20 degrees Celsius. And we get reasonably hot and humid in the summer, like mid-30s degrees Celsius with 60-70% humidity, that kind of stuff. So it's useful in that it challenges our buildings to be kind of pretty good at pretty cold and at pretty hot and humid.
Yeah. I mean, we have a similar situation here where I am in Adelaide, but we have down to maybe 5 degrees in winter and 35 degrees, 40 degrees in summer. Not as extreme as what you have, but we have similar issues where we have to deal with quite cold, not compared to you, but quite cold and quite hot.
Yeah. And if you think about the human comfort zone tends to be in the low 20s to the mid 20s. If you're going up to 35, that's, 10 degrees warmer than we'd like. And if you're going down to 5, that's 15 or 20 degrees colder than we'd like. And so that's really what our buildings are for, is to smush that range of temperatures down to a more comfortable range. And I think one of the trends what's really good about the building science world around the planet is that we're talking about what are our climates, and not saying how do we build, but how do we build for our climates. And secondly, I think the challenge we face is that in the developed world, people are getting more and more picky about what is okay. And when you can buy a car that has adjustable temperature for the driver's side and the passenger side, and actually can blow cold air up your butt to keep you cool. Buying a house that costs literally 10 times more money, that you have a hard time even controlling the temperature in any knowable number, is kind of a surprise to them, right? And so that's part of in our business. That's why I think we're actually being asked more and more. It's not okay if it's no one died in the building when it got cold overnight. That's not the standard we're looking for. It's the level of, is it at least as comfortable as my car? And oftentimes we're not even getting to that level. And that's where we need to get to. That's where we need to grow to.
Yeah. We were talking off air about how people come to Australia from overseas. They'll come from Canada or from Europe, and they'll move to Melbourne because that's the first place people tend to go. And they'll say, "Oh, I've never been so cold in my life." They'll come to Adelaide. "I've never been so cold in my life inside my house." I thought Australia was warm. We're like, no, sorry.
And so,
our housing is crap.
The personal story I have about that is that I was born and raised in this climate zone, not too far away from here. And my partner, Victoria, was born and raised in northern Alberta, where cold is minus 40 degrees Celsius. So it's, they actually really know what cold is. And we did a sabbatical quite a few years ago at the university in Berkeley, and Berkeley, California, which is the Bay Area. And so we moved to Berkeley, California in December 2008. And we had absolutely that experience. We rented a house, and after a month, it was like our routine was get up in the morning and leave the house to warm up in the sunshine. Because even though it was only getting down to like, say, 10 degrees, it was like 12 in the house. And so we literally had that experience of saying, we've never, my partner, Victoria, who comes from Edmonton, said, I've never been so cold as in this warm climate. And that,
well,
I
it's
think
good to know.
When you tell me the story, that's quite an analogy, and it's not a surprise.
It's good to know that it happens
why. I think the reason is that the climate is not, it's not so demanding that it requires as much focus. And so when I first started working in the Bay Area, I discovered, to me, it was like, that's why they wear fleeces, is because you could wear a fleece in the morning and be comfortable, and then you shed the fleece, and then in the afternoon you could get down to short sleeve shirts, and then at night you put some sort of scarf around your neck, and because the temperature range was narrow enough that you could ignore the building and you could just add a little bit to squeak yourself through. And if you're Swedish or you're German or you're Canadian, for sure, you just don't have that option. You got to get it right, because otherwise it is horribly uncomfortable. And then once you start down that path, it's easy to turn the dial to get you into a better spot. Whereas if you don't even have to do things like insulation and air tightness and thermal bridge management and condensation control, if that's not your normal modus operandi, well, then being pushed to doing all that to meet higher comfort requirements is hard. And that, I think, is what we're seeing, what I saw as early as 2000 in Japan, what I see happening in parts of Europe where they're discovering air conditioning. It's like, oh my gosh, I had no idea.
They actually need to. They actually need to cool their buildings now. Yeah. We're having a heat wave at the moment.
And people are dying because they don't have air conditioning. I mean, so that's, I mean, it's not even just at the level of comfort. It's like at a certain point for the immunocompromised, for the old and the young, it's actually can be fatal. And we know that there are literally thousands more people dying than usual in France this week. Than a normal week in France, and that's because of the heat.
I have a friend who lives in Ireland, and she took her children to the beach, and the beach was just, packed with people. They live on the coast. But, in Australia, if you don't have an air conditioner in your home and it's really hot, you just go to the supermarket to cool down. But they can't even do that. Their buildings just aren't conditioned.
They're getting there. I mean, it is definitely changing. One of the things that the air conditioning sales rates are growing faster in Europe than they are in America, because in North America, most people have air conditioning by now. Even in a place like where I live, where it's minus 20 in the winter, most people have air conditioning. But it is really happening. It's the growth. It's just enough climate change that in the UK, and in France and Germany, that the growth rates are tremendous, and that changes how your building works. And so that means we have these kinds of podcasts to talk about. So how does it change, and what do I got to do different, and what do I got to tweak to make it okay? It's not just to buy a machine that goes whir and hope all is going to be well. It is often much more than that.
That is a beautiful segue into my very first official question. So what is we've talked about the context of, the world in terms of our housing and how we treat it. In your opinion, what is the single biggest mistake that Australia could just kind of leapfrog right now? What could we completely skip if we knew what was?
Well, the first response I'd have to that is I don't feel that I know enough about the details of Australian housing that that people should listen to what I say about this topic. However, what I have learned about Australian housing from one visit and a lot of interactions on various projects is that there really is a confusion between air tightness, air barriers, and vapor tightness and vapor barriers. And that usually isn't the most significant high level national strategy thing, but it is a common problem on the job site. It's a common problem in the design office. And
Absolutely.
the problem can result in real moisture problems in buildings and disappointing performance. So it has meaningful results, and literally everybody down to the Sparky has to know, what do I mean by an air barrier and what do I mean by a vapor barrier? And I've seen this in multiple countries, and I see this in New Zealand. Although it's much better in New Zealand because of efforts made to educate. And I think that's why Australia can also get on top of this confusion quickly.
Yeah, the company I work for, have you heard of ProClimate?
Yes.
The German company. The company I work for distributes ProClimate products throughout South Australia. So we do a lot of work educating builders and architects on detailing, the membranes, the air barriers, all the different layers in a wall assembly. So I agree with you. There is a huge confusion around not just the difference between an air barrier and a vapor barrier. There's a lot of different terminology. The membranes get called 15 different names, and they mean they're not the same.
Yeah,
it's such a complicated. You have no idea when you look at the two products next to each other how vastly different they can actually be.
It's a tower of Babel for our industry. Is these and I'm and it's not. I mean, membranes is where it's very real and very current, but it goes like throughout a lot of products in the building industry, and this sort of what the words are and what it actually works at. I really think there's a lot of value that began by an industry accepting terminology with really clear performance, like to say it does this, real good definitions. And things like we use words like sarking and noggings and underlayments, and then we move to water resistive barriers, and it's like it's not clear if you actually look at it. So what's the difference between sarking, underlayment, and building paper or a ProClima product, right? And we say ProClima here, but anyway.
We say ProClimate.
Yeah, I know. It threw me for a loop for a second. Anyway, so I think the language is a huge deal. It's not enough people give it the respect that's needed, because it really becomes a problem in builder asks for something, salesperson delivers something else, inspector is expecting something else, and designer is looking for something else. I mean, and it's like they might even all agree because the words they're using mean different things. And that's why that language is such a critical aspect.
Sorry, excuse me.
This is a topic that really chokes me up too, Jess. So I just, it's truly emotional for me as well. And that's why I said I care.
Oh, goodness me. We've already crossed over a couple of my questions. And I would like to drill down. So the difference between an air barrier and a vapor barrier, there's just in my experience, a lot of the industry doesn't know that there is a difference. As we've said, lots of different names, confusion about how they actually work. So could you explain for, a mostly Australian audience, what the difference is, please?
Yeah. And actually, I would even, the normal way to try and describe these is something a concept that I know you've raised in other podcasts about, the perfect wall. I'm putting air quotes on there for people who have audio only versions of this. And one of to me, the most important aspect of the perfect wall is that it clearly identifies the critical functions, the control functions of an enclosure. Many people, not wrongly, but they focus on the order of the layers. And that's actually not the only thing about the perfect wall that's important. In fact, I would argue that maybe the most important thing is that you know that there are these layers in an assembly for an enclosure that every system has to have. Whether it's a 400-year-old adobe building in New Mexico or a brand new estate home in Melbourne. And those control layers are in order of importance. First, job number 0 is structure, so it's got to stand up. And then control layer 1 is water. Number 2 is air. Number 3 is heat or thermal. And number 4 is vapor. And so these control layers, as a way, we describe them as control layers so that we can say they're not always just a thin thing and they're not always a product. But we should be able to identify on any assembly what is a water, what is the air, what is the thermal, what is the vapor. So you specifically were addressing what's the difference between water and air and vapor. And those are historically been the most confusing ones. And in a way, it's kind of ironic that they're confusing because let me explain. A air control layer controls the flow of air across it. And the vapor control layer controls the flow of vapor by diffusion across it. And the only thing that's often left out of that description is vapor control layers are vapor by diffusion, which is a specific scientific nerdy mechanism of water vapor transport. But many times almost all practical assemblies, it's controlling the airflow that provides the most benefit and is most necessary for successful performance. One of the reasons we want to control airflow is because air contains water vapor, but that doesn't make it a vapor control layer. Air also contains pollutants, also contains like dust and pollens and the exhaust from that idling FedEx truck outside the front door. And the pesticides that they've just sprayed to keep the termites away from the perimeter of your building. So all of that's in the air, and we don't want that air to mingle into the air in the home that we've cleaned up and conditioned. Vapor is part of that story, but it's only one part of that story. Vapor control layers they're the simplest layer. They're a layer that just controls water vapor movement by diffusion, the movement of water vapor from more water vapor to less. And that's the problem here, is that vapor is in air. And so people get easily confused by the air control layer and the vapor control layer. I'm not sure if that's, you think I'd have practice after 30 years. I'm not sure if that's a succinct distinction between them. But it's a major challenge. And in most of your climate zones, it's really weird that you would care about vapor diffusion. If 5 degrees is a cold night, like vapor diffusion is not something you need to worry about. But if it's 35, you do care about air.
We have had most of our vapor diffusion issues are obviously in the colder climates. And we have had some research at the University of Tasmania that have shown, the reason our building code changed a few years ago. Our building code changed in 2019 from being able to use vapor barriers in our wall assemblies on the outside of the structure to vapor permeable. So all of our cold climates, and I'm using inverted commas for anyone who's not not watching the video, they're cold to us. You can't use. So we have 4 classes. I'll give you a quick Australian context. We have 4 classes of membrane. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 are vapor barriers, 3 and 4 are vapor permeable. So you can only use the class 3 and 4 depending on your climate zone. In the cooler climates, you can't use a vapor barrier product.
You're saying you can only use them on the outside. What about on the inside?
On the inside, there's no requirement. We do have a Proclimer have a vapor control layer that's used on the inside of some projects. Not all builders use that product. That is considered a high performance building product here in Australia. The builder I work for uses it fairly regularly. Builders in this pocket use it semi-regularly, or at least are aware of it. But yeah, it's not a commonly used product in Australia.
And so I think actually you're highlighting also one of the concerns with a vapor control layer is that we'd come in North America, and I mean by North America, I mean Canada and the northern U.S. states, had come to the conclusion somewhere in the 80s or 90s, when in doubt, leave it out, was what the sort of the tagline for vapor barriers. And one of the things is that we had always had a tradition of the only place you would ever conceive of using a vapor diffusion control layer would be on the inside. I mean, like, duh, you wouldn't put it outside of the insulation. But what you're describing is that people were actually putting vapor diffusion resistant layers on the outside. And that's where, well, wait a second, that's a bit weird, and you got to be careful about that, even again, when you're at. So the question is, if you use a vapor diffusion resisting layer, you have to give it some serious thought everywhere in Australia and beyond. But I'm just saying, because of Australia. And when I say vapor diffusion resistant layer, I'm being quite clear in that, for example, let's say you were to use corrugated steel, pre-painted corrugated steel as your cladding system. Right? I mean, you use that, right? Sure.
All the time.
Is that a vapor diffusion resistant layer? Well, by golly, it's about as good as it gets. So, okay, if you put that on the outside, you now say you now need to have a response in a climate where it gets below, I would argue below 12 degrees, maybe. Yeah. Something like that, 12 degrees Celsius, somewhere between 12. You'd be going, oh, you're using a piece of steel on the outside, eh? Now, only in Canada would you say A, but anyway. So that
we say that here.
Do you? Okay, oh gosh, you're closer and closer all the time. So we would, now what do we normally do when we use steel on the outside as cladding? Well, we provide an air gap that we ventilate as one of our solutions. Anytime you let air flow around a vapor diffusion resistant layer, you bypass its vapor diffusion resistance by using airflow. And it's like you just sort of negate its performance. You blow air around it. And that's why we ventilate many roofs. That's why we would ventilate behind metal cladding. That's why we would even ventilate behind some sorts of polymer claddings, etc. Any vapor diffusion control layers, vapor diffusion resistance can be offset by allowing air to flow around it.
I need to ask you more about that. So in Australia, we've just introduced in the 2025 building code, which is being introduced in different states at different times, and everyone's confused. However, there is ventilated air cavities has been used by, again, builders in this space for years, but it's being introduced now into the building code, as is the vapor permeable layer on the outside of the frame in cold climates. I just need to clarify what you just said. Are you saying that if we use a vapor permeable layer on the outside, because these vapor permeable layers for us, like the Proclimer system, is and other brands as well, are a air barrier and a vapor control layer as well. They're air and vapor control. They do both. So are you saying that if we put a ventilated air cavity next to a vapor permeable product, a vapor permeable membrane, we're negating the vapor diffusion properties of it? No,
I'm saying if you have a vapor impermeable, a non-vapor permeable product, you like a piece of sheet metal or glass or even glazed terracotta tile, if you allow air to flow around it, you bypass the vapor resistance.
Got
If you
it.
use a vapor permeable layer, then it's vapor permeable, so it's not a problem.
Well, that's why I was confused.
I know,
I
but
to
I
make
mean,
sure. Wait a minute, are we stuffing this up here?
But you also would say, I wouldn't call a layer that allows vapor diffuse through it a vapor control layer. I would call that a vapor non-control layer. Isn't the reason that you make it vapor permeable is so it doesn't limit vapor diffusion? Like, how could you possibly, in a sane world, call that a vapor, something that doesn't control vapor, a vapor control layer?
Well, I guess yeah, I guess.
In the same way, I wouldn't call something an air control layer if it didn't control airflow across it.
Fair enough.
And
I mean, it controls it by allowing it through. I don't know. That's terminology. Again, here we go.
It controls it by not controlling it. I mean,
Yes.
So Jess, I think you have a future as a lawyer. But
oh no, I don't. I'm the worst.
I'm just saying,
in the
though,
world.
This goes back to that initial discussion about language. If we're going to tell people you need to use a layer here that is permeable to water vapor diffusion, and then call it a vapor control layer, what are you going to call the layer that actually restricts vapor flow? I mean, they're not all vapor barriers. They could be
vapor barrier, but yeah.
And right. And vapor barrier, here's a reason why barrier has often found challenges in the practicing world. Barrier suggests that it stops things. I mean, like, call me crazy, but at least in the English we use here, a barrier to something is something that stops it. And so if you call something a vapor barrier, but it still allows some vapor through, well, that's not, you could call it a crappy vapor barrier, a not very good vapor barrier, but you wouldn't be right to call it a vapor barrier. When I use the example of steel or aluminum foil or glass, those are vapor barriers because they literally allow de nada, which is Spanish for nothing.
It's time for a quick sponsor shout out. Today's episode of the Building Sciology Potty is proudly brought to you by our amazing sponsors, Enduro Builders and Climasure. A huge thank you to these incredible businesses for supporting the podcast and helping us spread the word about better buildings to live and breathe in. Your support makes this podcast possible. Please head over to their websites and follow their social pages.
True. And so those are real vapor barriers. But if I were to use many of the membranes that are not metallized on the marketplace, they will all allow some vapor through. And you can argue, is it really a vapor barrier? And so it becomes an arbitrary scientific line that we draw by consensus committee about what is a vapor barrier. And, the numbers have changed historically over time, and they have changed. They, to this day, are different in Italy than Sweden than Japan. But they're all small numbers. Let's put that clear. A vapor barrier is always a small number. But I didn't realize that you were actually using the term vapor control layer for something that allows water vapor through it. That's gobsmacking to me. And that's just, you're asking for confusion.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Note to self, note to industry. Everyone out there,
you invited me, Jess. I didn't ask to be on this show. I'm sorry.
We want the info. Okay.
All right.
Now, I want to go back to something else you said before as well about the control layers and the 4 of them and how there's different, they're in different orders. So you've said water, air, heat, and then vapor. In Australia, we say water, air, vapor, then heat. We put heat last because heat sort of becomes, once you control those other 3 things, all of those unintended consequences of putting in insulation start to dissipate. So is that the order that you would say? Thermal control before vapor control?
I'm putting them in the preferred order that I gave for some, and it's not always the best order. It is the preferred order for most assemblies to avoid problems and deliver performance. And vapor control layers are the least impactful to performance. You only need to even think about vapor diffusion properties of materials once you've installed insulation. If you haven't installed
Yeah.
insulation, who gives a crap? I mean, go look at any building in Australia that's over 100 years old and go find the vapor control layer. Well, they didn't have any. They didn't need any. The whole concept of vapor barriers, not vapor control layers, which seems to be an Australian invention, but vapor barriers was because
just
we
made it up.
invented thermal insulation that was really lightweight and really open to water vapor diffusion. If you don't need to worry about vapor control layers if you're using foam insulations of any type, if you're using adobe, if you're using masonry, if you're using wood, you need to only think about it when you're using lightweight, fibrous, highly vapor open insulating materials. That's the only time when you need to care about vapor control layers. And that the
I guess that's
previous
why
5,000 years of experience building buildings did not use highly vapor permeable insulations, and therefore they didn't have to think about this whole vapor control layer thing. But we do. And now that's the only time we need to think about it.
So, I mean, in Australia, we use lightweight timber frames with this highly vapor
Totally.
permeable
Yeah.
insulation. And
Yeah.
so I guess that's why we've reversed the order, because we have to, this whole, membrane thing, and, controlling vapor or not controlling it, is a massive education piece that we are missing. So
And
I
we
guess
went
that's
through the
why
same,
we put it first.
But we went through the exact same history as Australia. I mean, as I'm sure all your audience is aware, our home building tradition is wood frame. It's very similar to yours. We don't use dwangs. We just call them different weird ass names depending where you are in the country.
Noggins, for those listening.
Noggins. We don't ever use that. But anyway, but the framing is very similar and a lot of the same rules. The difference is we began putting light and fluffy insulation between the studs 100 years ago. Right? So we were
we started doing that
advertising
maybe 15 years ago, 20.
And so it became, but it was not the norm. It was not the norm until, and even depending where you are, post-World War II, it became a thing people would regularly talk about, but not always do, except in the coldest of climates. And in the coldest of climates, it was not a dominant thing to do until the 60s, which is admittedly over 50 years ago. So we went through a long transition of wood timber frame, pitched ventilated roofs, no insulation, and then we started insulating roofs first, then we insulated walls. But that doesn't change the vapor control layer importance. In fact, what all of that taught us was that you can get away with you can build a lot of insulation in some pretty brutal climates without ever thinking about vapor control layers. And that we have living proof of literally millions of buildings. So only when the temperature differences get large, when the insulation levels get high, and when the interior cold weather comfort increases humidity, do we actually need to even do anything about them? The history of vapor control layers in North America, which a colleague of mine, Bill Rose, University of Illinois, wrote a book on this. The history
Who was that, sorry?
Bill Rose from University of Illinois.
Write that down.
He's retired now. He wrote a book called Water in Buildings. He was always the historical conscience of building science conferences in the 90s and into the 2000s. And he would remind us that we invented vapor barriers without a lot of science. And the requirement for a vapor diffusion resisting layer, I'm not going to call it a vapor control layer since apparently that doesn't work. A vapor diffusion resisting layer was based on demonstrably documented black and white, wrong science. They thought it was caused by diffusion. And they discovered it was caused by the moisture problems were being caused by air movement. The difference between the recommendations for vapor control being a low vapor permeance layer and the discovery that actually it was air that was causing their moisture problems was 20 to 30 years. And that still is working its way through our system, our construction system. Our building codes have largely sorted that out. And they're very explicit that there's something called an air barrier and something called a vapor barrier. And they're completely separate things. You can buy one product that does both things, but they're completely separate in terms of design requirement. And in almost all of Australia for housing, I'm really struggling to think about when I would ever need to use a low vapor permeance material. Need to. You don't need to solve moisture problems in Melbourne.
What about in Cairns or Darwin?
There, you really want to be careful you want to be very careful about using something that has low vapor resistance. And if you do use it, you want to put it on the outside. But even in Darwin, you have to be careful because you're much more likely to be successful with that in a hot, humid climate like that. But even in those climates, it sometimes gets cooler at night.
Yeah.
So depending how far away you are from the coast, and then if you start, getting a little bit slap happy with your vapor barriers on the outside, you can also cause problems. So I go back to when in doubt, leave it out.
Yeah, there's up in the Atherton Tablelands in far north Queensland, which is inland from Cairns. They get down to minus temperatures in winter overnight, and they can be 30 degrees and 98% humidity in the afternoon. So they've got massive issues with controlling the vapor in the air constantly.
And I know this has come up in the past. So we've been talking about vapor control layers, air control layers, and we were generally thinking about something that might be a millimeter thick or even less. But historically, when we built masonry buildings, we provided that brick provided some thermal resistance, not non-trivial thermal resistance. And there was never a need to control vapor diffusion because the material itself had built-in vapor diffusion resistance. And the modern equivalent of that would be foam insulation. Not all, but most foam, polyurethanes, polyisocyanurates, phenolics, etc., are all sufficiently closed cell that they have built-in resistance to vapor flow and resistance to heat flow. And as a consequence, you don't need a vapor barrier. And in Cairns or in Melbourne or on the mountain in the top of Tasmania.
What about the gaps? We get a little bit, particularly in retrofit situations, we get very explicit about making sure that all of the joins are taped because, yes, the product itself is vapor resistant, but what about really the gap?
So now we're getting into the question of, if you're trying to manage vapor diffusion, how important is it to avoid holes and cracks and rips and tears? But in your advice that you're giving, 100%, not because of vapor diffusion, though. I'm trying to stop air from flowing through, not trying to stop vapor diffusion.
Well, air carries vapor, right? Yeah.
Oh, it does, but it doesn't matter about the material properties. That's why it's a vapor. It's not a vapor control layer. It's an airflow problem. A crack allows airflow. You don't have to ask what his vapor permeance is. You have to say, find the holes and plug them. Now, but even if you were to seal those joints between, say, foam boards with something that stops air, but doesn't stop vapor diffusion, you have a minuscule chance of a problem in extreme climates. Not impossible, but the key here, though, is stop the air. And the
Mhm.
concern about when we start talking about vapor diffusion resistance, job site people, the trades installing the product, the supervisor looking over the site, the inspector, everybody thinks they've solved the problem by specifying a vapor resistant product. Or, yeah, tape all the cracks. That's good. We'll solve that. But that's not good enough for air. For air, it's not about the product. It's about making sure that you have proper installation so there are no cracks, openings, and penetrations. And that is why it's so critical to distinguish that the reason we want to tape the joints in that foam is to stop the air, not to stop vapor diffusion. We're trying to stop air convection.
This is getting onto dew point conversations and all sorts of things, which I definitely want to get to. I think I'm going to go back to the tropics again for a second. In far north Queensland and Darwin and those, and Broome and all those hot, humid climates in Australia up north, they have very open housing. They have a lot of louvered windows. They have a lot of ceiling fans. They have a lot of, open doors and a lot of air movement because obviously it's very humid, but they also have conditioned buildings. And they also have, cool conditioned spaces in their buildings. My question is, controlling air up there seems to be absolutely crucial, but they don't want to control air. They want to have it free moving. So in a hot, humid climate, what is your advice for making sure that the mold growth and comfort, like mold growth is minimized and comfort is maximized?
We haven't even discussed health yet, but nevertheless, the mold part is part of that, right?
That's the why behind everything we're doing, right?
Well, maybe what you're doing, but a lot of times, a lot of the reason we're doing it is to meet the construction deadline.
Well,
and the move-in date that the owner's insisting.
Yeah.
And we're sacrificing health on that altar. But here's a really, this is why I want to be quite careful in answering this, because in many places which have hot, humid weather, like Darwin, let me just say, in the United States, they're not opening the windows and the doors and using louvered openings to let the air flow through. They're using mechanical space conditioning to keep the relative humidity in the space low.
They do that too.
And reducing the temperature somewhat. And
in the really, really hot parts of the year, the houses are completely closed up. The air conditioning is pumped and the CO2 is at 2,000, 3,000 parts per million. You know?
But the first two parts you definitely can do, and that's because you do call it HVAC systems, I believe. Do you not call them?
We do. That's more of a commercial term, but yes, it applies across the board.
And so the V in HVAC is for ventilation. And ventilation doesn't mean stirring the air around the building. Ventilation means discarding waste air to the outdoors and providing clean, filtered, fresh air into the indoors. And so the big reason, the joke we have here is that many HVAC jobs are hack jobs because they don't include the V. And if you are getting 2,000 ppm CO2, well, that's just an abject failure of the mechanical contractor. I don't know how it's like, and the reason I can't blame an Australian contractor installing mechanical systems is that no one's saying, oh yeah, it actually matters that we provide fresh air to the people in this house. We're going to rely on mistakes made by the electrician and people who make crappy windows to provide fresh air. That's just insane. And that's something where there's nothing can fix this unless the culture precedes it. So there are so many trivially simple, inexpensive, and effective methods of providing ventilation and fresh air. We don't have to talk about it. The hard part is the culture that, when you close down the house, you need to provide ventilation. That is the cultural breakthrough that needs to happen. In the same way that we have to have a breakthrough is that it's not about vapor freaking diffusion. It's about air tightness. Plug the holes, keep the bugs and the dust outside,
and you will save energy and make a healthy home. I'm sorry if that's a negative outcome to you, but we need to keep the dust and the bugs outside, and codes are going to require us to save energy. And yes, you will create a healthy and comfortable indoor environment that manages moisture.
Mm-hmm. 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 So people up in far north Queensland and Darwin, listen up. Keep the air outside.
Well, here's the challenge though, Jess, is that you're in a transition period about, well, what do you do when we haven't entered the lockdown the house mode? And this is the thing, you're even 35 years ago, I don't know why I chose 35, even 40, 50 years ago, you wouldn't be doing that in houses. The option was it's open or it's not there. So what's happened is we've created a new option, which, is sort of, you can look at modern as a negative or a positive here, but it's a new option where you can control the interior environment. And that is, by the way, the option that historically people have tended to choose when given that option. And so that's why we now have a discussion about choice. This is not something that people in southern Florida discuss anymore. It's clear we're going to have an airtight building that's well insulated, and we're going to use mechanical systems to control the temperature and the humidity. And then they try to do it without ventilation, and then they realize that people got sick and bled from their ears, et cetera. And so then now they have ventilation as well.
That doesn't sound good.
That's the pathway. The question is, how can we revert to this open building opportunity? So you might be okay. It's 27 degrees, 65% relative humidity. You can open the windows and doors. You're not going to get mold unless you do something now. Now you run the air conditioner while you leave the windows and doors open. And now that 27-degree air with 65% humidity is going to condense all over refrigerated components, often hidden inside of hollow spaces in your building, which are usefully lined with either wood or paper, right? Because the paper is there for the young and weak mold, so they can get a start, and then the wood is there to meet the appetite of the aggressive growing mold. So you got to be incredibly careful about when you do the switch over from the open home to the controlled home. And people get into trouble when they try and do both. And that, of course, is also terrible for the environment and the climate. And they also get into trouble as we learn the cultural ways of operating homes. When is it okay to switch? When can I open the windows? Usually, you can come up with simple rules for a climate, but again, it's back to being aware that there are choices to be made, and it's no longer your grandparents' home. We're now going to be, we're expecting more, and so we have to operate the homes differently, and that means we have to start building them differently.
Mic drop.
But you mentioned mold, but it's interesting that there are lots of complaints in hot, humid climates about modern living. For example, corrosion in the electronics of your TV. It's like, this is not an uncommon problem. And it's like, well, yeah, like you shouldn't be using it outdoors. Well, I'm not using it outdoors. I just open the windows in my house. And say, yeah, well, guess what? That has the same effect. And so often that can become a problem sooner and is harder to solve than the mold problem. The mold problem is solved historically by using ceramic tiles, plastered with integral color walls, tropical hardwood for all of your trim, having no small enclosed closets. Everything has to be a ventilated
wardrobe. We know how to do this stuff, but when people say, "Yeah, but I want painted drywall with my Apple TV streaming Netflix," it's like, well, shit, you can't do that if you actually live outdoors. So make a choice. Just saying.
I was up in all of this stuff is so, I was up in Cairns recently and we went into an Airbnb that my friend was staying in, and they actually, like, the housing that they have, the way things are built is like you have to they leave the door open a crack, they leave the cupboards open a crack, because these places can't be left closed up, otherwise they just they start to crawl with growth.
And the people who have documented this the best, although it's hard for you to find this information, are hotel chains. So when a hotel chain like, say, Holiday Inn or Marriott moves into the Gulf of Mexico or the Caribbean, they have to change the designs of their hotels, and all of the closet doors go away. Like, you just can't have a closet, otherwise it's going to grow mold. Now, we've told them how they can do that, and that is you actually need to have mechanical conditioning that runs not on the key card entering the room. It has to run all the time. And what they do is to save energy, they turn the air conditioner off when a person checks out, and then the next day the temperature and the humidity in that suite is way through the roof, and it grows mold. So you either got to run it or you don't run it, and if you don't want to run it, you got to stop building things out of paper and mold food and expecting that they won't eat it. So you have to revert to the Caribbean island traditional materials and systems.
Yeah.
So there's actually more to this story. I mean, I can go on and on about hotels in the Caribbean, but it's this same problem of being caught in the shift between, we used to do it with open, well-ventilated spaces. We lived with what we got in the outdoor air, and we used materials that could tolerate it. And now we want to do better than that, and we want to put materials in our buildings that are different than that. And this is where we end up with a clash. And
100%.
It usually takes at least 2 human generations to sort this out. That's like 40 to 50 years. Even though I believe we have the knowledge documented to make us get there immediately, it's just so hard. Change is hard.
Oh, I know. I mean, you're 100% right with material selection. I'm walking through the streets of Cairns, everything's just covered in green and black. There's just green and black mold streaking down the outside of these buildings. I mean, that's the outside, so you can't do much about the humidity outside, but you can change your material specifications. You can change if you're giving the mold food. Anyway, oh my goodness, there is just so much to talk about. Okay, we're at nearly an hour now, and I recognize it's late in the evening where you are, so I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I still have like 5 questions to get through. I've got to pick the best ones. I think we've covered a few of them, but go ahead. Let's do some more. We have. I'm going to leave the leaky building crisis stuff for another day. I want to talk about design versus construct. We've hashed through vapor control and air control. Now I want to just change tact a little bit and talk about design versus construct, because in Australia we are a little bit down on the trades right now. We're like, you've got to communicate with your trades, because the buck stops with them. If they don't know what's going on, the whole building can just fail. So what are your thoughts on workmanship and the biggest contributing factor to building failures internationally? Because we will do red pen tests and air barrier schematics and all sorts of things for the trades, but where do you think, is it design or is it construct where the biggest issues happen?
Well, first of all, I think it should be pretty clear that both have to be there, right? And you're asking who is maybe not doing as good a job, and
whose fault is it, John? Tell me.
and that's why it's pretty obvious, I would hope, to anybody in the industry, that you're going to find all kinds of examples of bad workmanship, and you're going to find all kinds of examples of bad design. And the question is, Well, you're asking, okay, I want to know whose fault it is, Jess. Again, you should be a lawyer. This is back to you again, being a lawyer.
Really,
So
I'd be a terrible lawyer.
In a lot of the commercial world, institutional commercial, I actually put most of the blame on the designers. And that's partly because I is one. And I have expectations. So that doesn't mean that when we go to the job site that there aren't failures because someone didn't attach X to Y. But a lot of times you ask, why was that X to Y not connected? And it's because, well, the design made it practically impossible to do so. The design did not realize how, well, guess the walls are not straight up and down and floors are not flat. The only place where things are plumb, flat, and level is in Revit. In the real world, everything has bumps. It's got something that a lot of product manufacturers haven't learned yet is that they could actually be like dusty. Like dust could be on a material that exists on a construction site.
No.
And so then we stick a membrane or a sealant to it and it fails. And what do we do? Oh, well, we blame the trade. Well, really? I mean, should you be relying on that adhesion in that application, meaning outdoors on a job site? And my answer is no. That's literally sticking, as a designer, sticking your head in the sand and saying, well, just stick this to this, except you can't. And so you either need to choose different systems, different details, or different materials to make workmanship possible. Now, that's not saying that there's not lots of bad workmanship out there, but I'm saying there's lots of failures and performance shortfalls because you made it impossible or practically impossible to be able to achieve that level. And another aspect is you've only included the trades and the designers. There's a bigger system here about where, like, codes like that call things that don't control vapor control. Like, you know, like that's a part of the conversation.
That might have just been a Jess error. I don't know.
And we also have,
I'm not going to live that down.
We definitely edit that out. We also, like, how is a tradesperson supposed to know that it is incredibly important that there be no gaps in that joint between the two pieces of foam panel, unless you say it's an air control layer and then train them that air control layers need to have no holes in them? So I think that's why I lean towards saying it's usually designers, because I have more of the weight, because the designs are not being accommodating of reality. And they have a responsibility, and have always, for 100 years or more, you've had to say, what materials do I have available? What trades do I have available? What budget do I have available? What schedule do I have available? I choose my systems based on those constraints. And a lot of times people just want to draw something up in Revit, especially if you can do it in 3D. Oh, it's 3D. It's a really good design. No, it isn't. It's depending. Did you get the right materials, the right organization? Does it fit that locale? Have you found out what's in the local builder's yard? Can they buy your stuff? Or is it a 3-week lead time, kind of forcing the trades to do a substitution? Are you paying the trades $500 for a job that takes $1,000 to do properly? Well, guess what? You get $500 worth of work. So that's why it's so much more complicated than blame it on one or the other. But I am saying I put a lot of the blame on the design and the industry as a whole of not caring about performance, not measuring performance, not being clear what's expected, using good language. That's a big part of it.
We try to encourage builders and architects and designers to work together closely from concept. You know, that we try to encourage that relationship. If you're an architect, find yourself a preferred builder. If you're a builder, find yourself an architect, because then you can nut out problems on paper before you get to site.
And I'm sure, I mean, that is generally advice I've heard everywhere, but it is often put at risk by money. So
Yes.
then the
100%.
owner wants 3
Yeah.
bids. Oh,
Yeah.
I see. So you want the good person, the uninformed person, and the bad person, because that usually goes high, medium, and low price. And so, like, why are we doing those 3? Oh, you want the bad person. Well, then why didn't you tell me that? But what that also means, if you're a designer, is that we actually spend far too much time documenting, designing fine details because we're trying to communicate things that we're not able to communicate at the right time and place. We actually can't talk to the builder about, how are we going to deal with that tough detail there, right? Because in the contractual system that most people set up is that it has to all be nailed down and buttoned down perfectly before you bid the job. And that actually rails against the natural, and what I believe is the most effective way, which is the designer and the owner are speaking to the contractor about, okay, how do I get this done? You know what? How do we do this? What are your ideas, right? But no, and a lot of times because of contractual things, we have to be so specific about every little detail, because once this contract's signed, we apparently have no control anymore. And so it really, you get very fundamentally different qualities of design and construction depending on how that relationship works. It absolutely still is the case that owners are saying, I want this contractor, I want this designer, and we're going to work as a team. Like, that's the best buildings in my career have been when we've had that, where it's people who all kind of understand the goal. Each of them have their own little, maybe priorities, but we're talking and able to be flexible, and it's not all based on whether I have a change order. And some of the worst jobs are the ones with the most high performance architects and contractors who are so bound by their contractual terms that the contractor completely on time, on budget, delivers a completely bad building. That's what it said I should do, and I can do it. That's how much a professional I am.
Yeah. Brilliant. Sounds like a solution. Okay. All right. I want to get to wood fiber. You've mentioned to me previously that wood fiber, it's a great material, but you have to use it properly because it can go moldy. It's a natural product, right? Wood fiber is having a bit of a moment in Australia. So I'd love to cover this before we wrap up.
Sure.
What do we need to do to use wood fiber safely?
Don't get it too wet for too long while it's warm.
Okay.
I mean, it's really, but that's simple. And now the question is, how do we achieve that? So one of the things that I say, what you should be worried about is that let's use some wood fiber on the outside of our timber frame behind a brick veneer. I mean, that's just stupid, because the brick veneer is going to get rained on and absorbing water, and the humidity behind it will be, relative humidity will be over 80% for, depending on the climate, 3 to 12 months a year. And if you put brick, air gap, wood fiber, well, you're just asking for trouble. So it's going to absorb moisture, it's going to grow mold, and it just depends on how much time.
So,
If you,
excuse me. So we don't tend to put wood fiber. I mean, external insulation in Australia is still, not really done. But the wood fiber and, different types of rigid external insulation is starting to be used.
Where?
So where normally,
like, how do you use rigid wood fiber? That you don't try and put it between the studs, do you?
No, we don't do that. We do. There are some bats. That's Styco.
Bats is different.
Styco They use Styco have a bat, and that can be used inside the bays. But generally, it's a rigid wood fiber on the outside. So I have one client who used wood fiber on the outside of her timber stud, and I think they're putting like a fiber cement sheet on the outside of that. So would you? I mean, we're talking about drained and vented cavities, etc. Is it okay to, because wood fiber is it's not hydrophobic.
Stop it.
It allows Yeah, and it allows water to drain through it though, right? So it will drain water safely, or will it? Like, can
Will
you
it?
put
I
a
mean,
can you
you
put a
should just
cladding
get one of
directly on
those,
it?
buy a little sample and set it into a container in your kitchen, and
It'll absorb
come
it,
back
right?
in a week and find out whether it's safely been able to deal with that water.
Okay, maybe I
That's the
will.
problem. It won't. And
Yeah.
so
Okay. Right.
so you have to be in the situation, fiber cement, wood fiber on the outside of wood
Yeah. A stud.
timber framing.
Usually with the membrane. So it would go insulated stud, vapor permeable membrane, wood fiber, maybe a batten, and then cladding. So there could be an air gap in front of that wood fiber as well.
So first of all, the ventilated air gap is critical in these applications if you have any kind of moisture at all. Now, maybe if you're in Alice Springs, it doesn't matter. If it never rains, you can do whatever you like. But if you're in a place where you're getting, 600 millimeters a year of rainfall, okay, now you have to do something like ventilation. And if you're in an area where you're getting 800 to 1,000 millimeters of rain, then you want to put a water control layer on the outside of that wood fiber, in addition to the water, air, vapor, not control layer you were using.
So you would put so you would put that membrane on the outside of the wood fiber.
Well, I would prefer to leave your Proclima type membrane on the inside of the wood fiber board, on the outside of the timber framing, because that's the best place to put it for long-term performance and durability. However, I want to provide some additional rain protection of the wood fiber board. And so we often use like really inexpensive building paper. Do you have still papers? Like you must have, like they certainly do in New Zealand, stuff that costs like a dollar a square meter. And you're just putting it up there as a rain shelling element to stop 90% of the rainwater that might get to that wood fiber board. And that
through the cladding.
And you're still relying on your inner layer as your primary control layer, but this is a water shedding layer because we have a material that's more sensitive. This is highly dependent on how much rain you have. And so if you have a bungalow with an 800 millimeter overhang, like more of a traditional home, it's so protected from rain. But let's say you have an architect involved. And now you have a 2-story building with a parapet that is a sharp enough edge that it cuts off the legs of incoming birds. And there's literally no way of resisting rainwater penetration. And then they, or worse, they put it on an angle, right? Like somebody, you get like a Leap Skint or a Zaha Hadid involved. And now it's like, now it's a disaster. So, and that's why it's so much. This is not even just a climate. Climate matters a lot because of the rain, but also it matters how complex and exposed is your design. And that's something that is often not given enough respect. And when we were not going to talk about the Leaky condo crisis, but understanding that exposure and the complexity of the design is everything, because it almost explains entirely all the failures and all of the successes. You keep building bungalows with 800 millimeter overhangs and hip roofs, you can build straw bale houses. I mean, that might be a little bit risky, but only a little bit. But you go to a 1,200 millimeter overhang on a bungalow, and you can build them in Melbourne quite safe and durably. So and that's why it's so hard to say, well, can I use this material? Well, you can if it doesn't get wet.
If it doesn't get wet, it depends.
Too much. It can get wet for a week.
But it has to be able to dry.
As long as it dries out again, we're good, right? But if it gets too wet for too long when it's warm, and the warm means like 5 degrees means that even mold like wants to go on holiday. But when you're at 35 degrees and wet, well, you can, like, that's what we do in labs to grow mold, right? We put them in, we add water and we heat it up to 32 degrees Celsius. That's the best way to grow mold. Well, if that's your climate zone, maybe you shouldn't be using mold food on the outside of your building.
Yep. So double membrane layer system for wood fiber if it's going to be exposed to water.
And
But
I
even
think you should
if there's
be
the cladding you shouldn't rely on, right? You don't rely on the cladding.
Right.
Yeah.
And it'll depend a bit on the cladding. Like some of these cladding systems are open jointed, and then some buildings are highly exposed and some aren't. So that's why there's a bit of a judgment call. And I wouldn't focus so much on calling them membranes because I know that's the product, but the product is providing air tightness, water tightness, and not vapor tightness. That layer is behind the wood fiber, and the layer on the front, maybe it's a membrane, whatever you want to call it, but it's a water shedding layer. It is enhancing the resistance to liquid rainwater. That's why we're putting it there. And the ventilation is there to deal with moisture that is stored in materials and stored in gaps.
Yep. Okay. All right. We aren't going to cover the leaky building crisis today, but for the listener, go and have a look, go and Google leaky building crisis in New Zealand, go and Google leaky condo crisis in Canada, clue yourself up as to why that happened. And it's significant issues that have happened internationally over the years that we can avoid in Australia if we know what caused it. So go have a look. I'll put some links in the show notes for some interesting resources. All right, Dr. Straube, the last question is the same question I ask everybody on this show. I try to get out the really important. I mean, we've covered so much today, but I try and get out like the really key things for each person. What is the one most important thing you've learned in your career that you would want the listener to know?
Oh my gosh, the one most important thing I've learned, there's so many ways I could answer that. Like it's about the people would be one way to answer that. But paying attention to all the details, everything so you can't just think about the materials, the products. You can't think about the design. You got to think about how they build it. You can't just think about how to build it. You have to think how you're going to maintain and repair it. You can't just think about maintain and repair it. You got to think how are people going to live in it and how are we going to demolish it and how is it going to be recycled. So, and once you are aware of there's just so much, you'll never stop being curious about learning the next thing because there's so much. Buildings are everywhere and really important and complicated, and you got to spend a lot of time paying attention. Don't fall into ruts and think we've got it figured out. If you got it figured out, it's only because you don't know.
And the information is out there. All right. This has been excellent. Thank you so much for spending your evening with me. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you again.
Yeah, that was a pleasure. I mean, love talking about these topics. It's kind of what I do.
Yeah. I know. We're weirdos, aren't we?
We are.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Straube. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I'm sure we'll chat again. Bye-bye.
I love that. Bye. That is all for today. Thanks so much for tuning in. There will be another episode in a fortnight, so if you would like to listen into the types of conversations that I have all the time, please subscribe on your chosen platform. Rate the show, leave a comment, whatever you like, share with your friends and family. I'd love for you to spread the word about the Building Sciology Potty. There's a link in the episode description where you can head to a landing page, and there are some show notes there with relevant links and a full transcript of the show as well, and also links to my socials. So if you're not already, I'd love for you to follow along there too, as I share lots of building science and building biology tips. Thanks again. I'll be back in 2 weeks, so until then, happy healthy building.